The title of this screencast is a new way of thinking about documentation. But really the title should be Why Your Documentation Stinks and How to Fix It. Why does your documentation stink? Your documentation stinks because it doesn't meet the needs of your users or your organization. It doesn't help your users do anything or accomplish real tasks. It doesn't decrease your support requests. And it doesn't help your organization work more efficiently. ScreenSteps Live supports a whole new way of thinking about documentation that makes sure that your work delivers real business results for you and your users. In this screencast, we'll show you how to skip the planning phase of documentation and get right into creating useful content, how to create documentation in bite-sized chunks, how to establish a documentation process so that you can make just-in-time documentation, and how to connect your documentation with VELCRO instead of cement. I remember being at a meeting of instructional designers years ago. They were trying to decide on a set of criteria for good instructional design. Someone said, "Everyone agrees that planning is a key part of creating good content, right?" Everyone agreed except for me. You would have thought that I said the sun didn't rise in the east with the way they looked at me. Planning may be really important in some situations, but for the type of materials you're going to create with ScreenSteps Live, you don't need to plan. The purpose of ScreenSteps Live is to answer questions your customers actually have. You can't possibly anticipate every question your users will ask, so don't. Just follow this simple method. Write down actual questions your customers have, and then answer them. That's all the planning you need. Your planning stage should take no more than 10 minutes, depending on how fast you can type. Bite-sized chunks. Documentation that is created in bite-sized chunks is easier to write and easier to use. Remember, people don't read documentation, they reference it. The first time they open a manual, they go right to the table of contents or to the index. By breaking your material into bite-sized chunks, you'll make it much easier for your users to find the information they need. Here are some tips for creating more effective bite-sized chunks. People want to do things with your product. Make your chunks task-based. They should tell the user how to do something. Titles matter. The title of your content will affect how you author it and how your users find it. In ScreenSteps Live, the bite-sized chunks are ScreenSteps lessons. A good habit to get into is to title each ScreenSteps lesson with the question it is answering. This simple method will dramatically decrease the time it takes you to author lessons. Let's look at some good and bad examples of lesson titles. First, here we have a bad example. This is the type of title we see a lot: How to Use the Admin Screen. There are two problems with this. First, it isn't task-based. What will I as a user have accomplished after I am done using the admin screen? I have no idea. Second, as an author, from the title I have no idea how much or how little of the admin screen I will cover in this lesson. Will I cover each feature in depth, or will I just give a brief overview? This title is much better. How do I create a new account? As an author, I know exactly the content I need to write. As a user, I know exactly what the lesson will teach me to do. Process, not projects, or just-in-time documentation. Now, just a bit ago, we said that you didn't need to spend time planning. That is only true if you get the idea of documentation projects out of your head. You aren't working on a documentation project. You need to establish a documentation process. Projects begin and end. Processes are something you do every day. So remember these things. You are never done with your documentation. As long as your users have questions, you need to answer them. As new questions come in that aren't covered in your documentation, create a new ScreenSteps lesson with the question as a title and answer it. Post it to ScreenSteps Live and send the user a URL to that lesson. Your ScreenSteps Live site will grow as you need it, and you'll be practicing just-in-time documentation, creating documentation right in the moment you need it. Connect your content with VELCRO, not cement. Content that is connected with cement is hard to pull apart and customize for specific situations. If you can't point your users directly to a URL that answers their question, then your content is connected with cement. For example, if you have ever answered a customer question with a response that looks like this, your content is connected with cement. Open the PDF manual, go to page 244, look at the second paragraph. That should show you what you need. That's far too much work for your customer, and really far too much work for you. It's going to be hard for you to pinpoint what the customer needs to look at to answer their question. When your content is connected with VELCRO, it's much easier to pull apart, so you can point your users right to the answers they need. Here's a much better example of what your response should look like. Simply follow these instructions and a URL that points them to their answer. If you're answering a more complex question, then combine several different lessons into the same response. The important thing is to think about being able to separate your documentation into parts that can be easily stuck back together in different combinations based on your user's needs. If you have authored your content in bite-sized chunks using ScreenSteps and ScreenSteps Live, then this becomes very easy. So let's look at a complete workflow example of applying these principles while using ScreenSteps and ScreenSteps Live. First, skip the planning. Just write down the questions your users actually have. Use bite-sized chunks. Create individual ScreenSteps documents to answer each question that you wrote down previously. Establish a process. As questions come in that you haven't answered in your documentation, create a new ScreenSteps lesson and publish it to ScreenSteps Live. Connect with VELCRO, not cement. Point your users directly to the lessons that answer their questions. You can also group related lessons with tags or reassemble your lessons into new manuals as your needs change. ScreenSteps Live gives you a lot of flexibility. ScreenSteps Live lets you take a whole new approach to documentation. By implementing these methods, you will create documentation that helps your customers, decreases support requests, increases efficiency in your organization, and most importantly, you'll create documentation that doesn't stink.